Welcome to this special Minterests presentation. I'm your host, MOS6502. Today I'll be talking about my favorite internet subculture, the Demoscene. It's a unique blend of computer programming and digital artistry that I find fascinating. I hope you enjoy this guide. Before we continue, I should warn viewers that some of the video clips in this presentation contain flashing strobe lights effects and other psychedelic colors. I'm not an expert in photosensitivity, but you might want to skip this one if you have issues with that. Let's start by answering the basic question. What is the Demoscene? The Demoscene is a loose culture of programmers, musicians, artists, and others who work to produce demos, small, self-contained computer programs that create audiovisual presentations. In other words, people make little exe files, then you download and run them, and they produce a cool video with a soundtrack for you to watch. Demos are created by individuals or groups, and then entered into competitions at a demo party, where participants can vote on their favorites to win. The Demoscene originally grew on BBS and in-person meetups, and is now a global event thanks to the internet. Fun fact for you, both the Finnish and German Demoscene were accepted as UNESCO Digital World Heritage Institutions in 2020. Okay, so let's talk about some important shared concepts when talking about the Demoscene. First off, there is technical wizardry, or doing cool tricks with your computer. In practice, this covers things like size restrictions on demo files, creating demos for esoteric or locked-down platforms, exploiting glitches in hardware to achieve unique effects, and just pushing hardware to limits. How many sprites can we cram onto the screen at once? How many sound channels can we eke out of this terrible chip? Also important is what I'll call digital artistry, or doing pretty stuff with your computer. So this would cover things like computer visual art, pixel art, glitch art, 3D modeling, etc., as well as computer-based audio arts, like chiptunes and micromusic, computer-synthesized music, and so on. Last is the idea of friendly competition, or dunking on your friends with your computer. Making a demo is commendable, but you can just release it on Twitter or whatever as an art project. What separates the Demoscene is that the demos compete with one another to show off who has the more elite skills. It's all in fun though, as the culture is also built on sharing and remixing. Practically nothing is copyrighted, and it's common to redo someone else's demo on a new platform, cover their song, disassemble their code to figure out how they did it, and release your tools or methods so others can see exactly how you did what you did. The scene is more than just fancy computer stuff, it's also hugely social, and an important part of going to the demo party is going outside to share a beer with some friends. Okay, with the introductions over, let's talk about the demo itself, the basic unit of the Demoscene. A demo is, again, a computer program that you run, which plays a computer-generated audio-visual presentation for you to watch. It could be released as a self-contained exe or zip file with some stuff in it, or maybe a ROM image for a game console or whatever. The point is that it's a program, so you just run it on the machine and it takes over from there. Demos are usually designed and built by a group of a few people over some months. The deadline is usually a party, so some friends decide in advance they plan to attend, form a group, pitch ideas, and build the demo, and then release it at the competition. Demo groups have varying degrees of formality. Some are long-standing institutions like Fairlight or Razer 1911, while others exist for just a single release and then they dissolve. The runtime of a demo is usually about 3 to 8 minutes. There are, of course, exceptions. Some size-limited demos basically show off all they could do in about 30 seconds. At the other end are mega demos that run for 30 minutes. There are 2 points to the demo. The first is to show off what the hardware can do, and the second is to show off what the people can do. So now we're going to watch some clips of a classic demo. This is FR08, The Product, by German group Farrosh. It took first place in the PC 64 kilobyte category at the party in 2000. Yes, I said 64 kilobytes. Everything you see here is procedurally generated from code that is smaller than the size of a screenshot of the demo. Farrosh has a long history of demo releases. This is one of their earlier ones, as they're now in their 66th release. It has kind of a revolving crew of members. This production had 5 people work on it, code by RYG, Chaos, and Yoda, music by KB, and graphics by 5or2. The whole thing is about 9 minutes long, so I'm going to commit blasphemy by cutting just a minute or 2 for now. Right, well, that was fun. So the last thing I'll say about demos is it might be helpful to talk about what's not a demo. A demo is not a movie. Movies are pre-recorded and just played back later. Demos must generate their visuals in real time. A demo is not a game. Games are interactive, demos aren't. You start it and then you just watch. And a demo is not commercial. Nintendo makes demos, but they aren't, demos. Well, usually, it's a gray area. Here's Bad Apple, a pre-rendered Touhou video. Bad Apple is not a demo. However, people have started porting Bad Apple to play on platforms that shouldn't support that, like the Game Boy, which doesn't really support FMV. Bad Apple on Game Boy might be a demo, depending on how it's done. This is Sumotori Dreams, a hilarious ragdoll wrestling game. It's not a demo. Or is it? Actually, Sumotori Dreams was initially released at Breakpoint 2007 in their 96 kilobyte game demo category, so this one does qualify. Similarly, this is K. Krieger from Farbra spin-off group The Product. It is a complete first-person shooter game in 96 kilobytes, with procedurally generated environments and multiple weapons, and so it's a Demoscene release. As for commercial, well, microcomputer companies did produce demos for their own hardware to show off what they could do, and these legacy tech demos are fondly remembered and referenced by seniors today. Here's the robot demo by Atari for their line of 8-bit computers. Better known as the Amiga Boing demo, featuring the now iconic red and white checkerboard bouncing ball. Not only could Amiga do this in real time, but it also ran alongside other graphical apps on the Amiga to demonstrate the multitasking ability of their new computer. This demo literally sold computers. When Gravis wanted to sell their new ultrasound card for PC, they recruited Demoscene group Triton to build this demo/commercial to show off its capabilities. Even this PC benchmark from 2001 could make the cut. Mad Onion's code pushed GPUs to the limit with demo style, and measured the host machine to show how fancy your hardware was. Unsurprising, since Mad Onion's employees came from the scene, including the musician. Now I want to discuss a brief history of the Demoscene. The earliest roots are inextricably tied to the piracy or whereas scene of home microcomputers. Then, as now, people needed software to run on their new machines, and bootlegging it was a free way to build a library. So people copied games, and developers added copy protection to it. Now we need a coder to crack the game, remove the protection, and make it distributable again. The process of obtaining, cracking, and distributing software took effort. Naturally, whereas groups would want to take some credit for their work. They could include a text file with credits, or the next step, the crack screen. The coder takes a little time to add a calling card to the start of the software they're breaking. Now when people boot the game, they know who made it happen. Over time, the crack screen gets more elaborate. Maybe add some graphics. How about an animation or a little tune that plays? These crack intros, or cracktros, became a showcase for the coder to demonstrate their skill in working the CPU. And over time, you get something like this. A crack intro for a Commodore 64 game from Whereas Group Orion. There's a lot going on here, but we have a soundtrack, flashing colors, and scrolling file with greets, or shoutouts, and news, all the ingredients of a classic cracktro. Here's one for the Amiga. Better hardware lets this programmer add some 3D effects to their crack, and someone's done a nice logo for them as well. Even into the home console scene, the trend continues, with different groups specializing in different systems. Eurasia for Game Boy Advance, Utopia on Dreamcast, or here, Paradox on Sony PlayStation. This crack for Wipeout 3 removes the copy protection checks, adds some cheats and a Paladin SC switch, and it has some style. The last thing to mention about the Whereas scene is the idea of copy parties. Before the internet, when phone lines cost money, groups would meet up in person with a box full of discs and spend a bunch of time making copies of each other's stuff. These could get pretty hectic, and sometimes the cops or authorities would even do a sting and bust a bunch of people for running afoul of copyright laws. Naturally, once groups started gathering to swap their releases, they'd show off their intros and try to one-up each other. After some time, the idea came to just split the whole intro thing off from the Whereas parts and start making demos for demo's sake. This is when the demo scene starts to stand on its own as a competition of artistic and technical merits and popularity without being attached to software piracy. We start to see demo parties whose purpose is the competition, and they begin to attract pretty significant numbers of people. This is a photo of Assembly 2004 in Finland, filling up a small stadium with attendees. Now, to be fair, part of this was a LAN party event as well, but it's a big departure from the copy parties of yore. You might be familiar with the Guinness World Record-holding event DreamHack. It's now known for esports and gaming, but did you know it originated as a demo party? Well, now you do. In fact, the scene was becoming large enough to spin off its own subcultures. For example, with the release of Little Sound DJ for Game Boy in around 2000, it helped launch an entire group of chiptune musicians, who went on to found sites like 8-Bit Collective or 8-Bit Peoples, dedicated to producing chip music on its own. One interesting story of the scene was watching the platform rivalry play out between the PC and Amiga computers. Here is State of the Art, an Amiga demo released in 1992 by group Spaceballs. This demo looks simple, dancing silhouettes on circular backgrounds, but it shouldn't be possible at all. The Amiga simply cannot do FMV, and yet here it is. This demo blew a lot of people's minds on release and set a technical bar to be matched. Now, this demo is Second Reality by Future Crew for the IBM PC running MS-DOS. This may well be the most important, influential demo of all time. It's basically 23 scenes linked together. It runs about 10 minutes, plus a long credit sequence, and it almost single-handedly put the PC on the map as a viable demo platform. There's a legendary soundtrack, tons of 3D effects, elaborate pixel art, the works. Designed for 486 machines running at 33 MHz, it actually predates id Software's Doom by 2 months. The Amiga, of course, continued to put up fierce competition. Desert Dream by Kefrons is a well-regarded demo from 1993 that does polygonal graphics and has its own beloved soundtrack. It even has a surprise midway through, declaring the end of Part 1, please insert Disc 2, and continues the show after swapping floppies. Heaven 7 by Exceed, released in 2000, is a masterpiece for PC in 64 kilobytes. It's a wonderfully atmospheric and dreamy demo, bolstered by incredible code that does real-time ray tracing on the relatively slow CPUs of the time. Just look at those shadows and reflections. RTX on 20 years before Nvidia did it. As the internet took off, new websites sprouted out that have since become central pillars for the demo scene. Scene.org serves many functions, but is now primarily a massive archive of demos released at parties dating back nearly 40 years. What functions more like a social media site and a showcase, a thriving message board for discussions of all demo scene topics, plus entry pages for individual demos that allow commenting and voting. And then there's the Mod Archive, a massive collection of something like 200,000 tracked music files available for download. This is, of course, only a part of the ecosystem, but some important sites nonetheless. That brings us to the modern demo scene. There are some tech changes going on that have had a huge impact. Modern shader-based GPUs have given an entire toolbox to the coders to make some extremely fancy stuff. Web-based demos are also on the rise. We now see demos running in the browser, using WebGL and so on, no download needed. A fun way to play with both of these is to use ShaderToy, which lets you write shaders in the browser and see instant effects. This 64 kilobyte demo is Elysian by Logicoma. I simply love everything about this demo and will let this clip speak for itself. Here we can see the new technologies being brought together in a really fun live coding event, the Shader Showdown. Contestants have 30 minutes to code up a GPU shader from scratch that is synchronized to music, and audience voting determines the winner at the end.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Give it up for the Shader Showdown finalists!
We're also seeing the rise of sofa scening, that is, virtual demo party attendance, or scening from your couch. This was a fun way for people to attend in previous years, but with COVID in 2020, this launched things into high gear. While Evoke decided to cancel their party, Revision instead went entirely online for both 2020 and 21. It was a good success, but there were still some issues to work out. One cool development since the influx of Arduinos, single-board computers, and other cheap hardware platforms has been demos running on custom hardware designs. In 2007, LFT and Cryo released the Hardware Chiptune project, a single-chip synthesizer that played one built-in custom tune when plugged into a battery. It took 5th place in Wild category at Birdie. Not so easily deterred, LFT returned to Breakpoint 2008 with the next iteration. This is Craft, a complete demo running on an Atmega microcontroller. VGA graphics output, a software synthesizer, and lots of demo effects running on a custom platform better suited for controlling your microwave or fancy gamer keyboard. It won first place. One last thing I'd like to say about the modern scene is that it seems to be making good strides towards inclusivity. For a long time, the scene has been the realm of nerdy males, but we're now starting to see more women in the space, and a greater presence of transgender and INBI members. The old guard has grown up and is now bringing their children in too. There have been MIT Scratch-based demos produced by kids, which are always a delight to see. I'll readily admit there's more that could be done in this aspect, but there are positive changes afoot. Oh, and before you think the Demoscene has truly left the whereas past behind it, if you launched a pirated version of Deus Ex Mankind Divided in 2016, you might have been greeted with this from renowned piracy group Razor 1911. Let's talk about demo parties for a bit. These are the social gathering place of Demosceners. It's where compos happen. They usually run over a weekend and attract anywhere from 20 to 2,000 people. There's usually one happening somewhere in the world every weekend, though most are on a small scale. Demoparty.net gives a good calendar. Most parties happen in Europe as that's where the scene really formed, but occasionally we get a big US-based one. Today, the biggest parties are probably Revision, Evoke, Assembly, and Outline. Parties are usually scheduled and structured. Besides just the competitions, there are also live music performances, tech talks, social hours, and other events to fill the day. Speaking of parties, here's a special class of demo, the Invitro. It's essentially an ad for an upcoming party, but in demo form. This one was for Revision 2013.
Very loud and messy inside the main hall.
Great. Evening comes.
Competitions are broken down into different categories to provide a way for demos to compete on a more even footing. There's usually a regular PC class, as well as size-limited ones like 64K, 4K, even down to 256 bytes. Other major platforms will often get their own category, typically the Commodore 64 and Amiga, but regional favorites like the ZX Spectrum in England, or there's simply a generic old-school category for non-PC platforms. Music categories are usually tracked, meaning a module-based format, more on that later, or streaming, which is essentially a free-form MP3 entry. For art, there's usually a pixel art category. Sometimes there's additional ones, like photography or 3D render, and there have also been live-act music, which is like a battle of the bands, and game categories. The last one is Wild, which is a catch-all. This can be for really out-there platforms like the TI calculators, physical constructions like Craft, or just truly bizarre creations, like a MySQL ray tracer, Microsoft Excel-based demo, or chess running in an MS-DOS bootloader in under 512 bytes. Let's talk a bit about the three major roles of a demo group. The first one is the coder. Coding is all about creativity within technical limitations. Sometimes that can mean using retro computers or old platforms where CPU and RAM are at a premium, or size limitations will force some really elaborate trickery. For example, a common trick in 4K executables now is, instead of putting costly wave samples for your musician to use, go dig into the built-in Windows MIDI player and use theirs. Other examples might be, say, using your own code as a source for semi-random data to make 3D geometry. In the old days, people who discovered new effects would release them in a demo, and others would then disassemble to see just how the heck they did it. The important thing was that coders didn't just copy what was done before, but they put their own spin on it. In fact, references, homages, and parodies were just fun, while directly copying or ripping was considered extremely lame. Nowadays, coders are more forthcoming with their secrets. Top demos often have a blog post later explaining how it was done, and some groups have open sourced their code as well. There's also a constellation of various demo tools that have been passed around and improved upon over the years. Perhaps most famously is UPX, the ultimate packer for executables, an indispensable size coding tool that reduces exe files by extremely high compression. Trackers, compilers, assemblers, and utility libraries also find their way into multiple productions. When coding for a platform, it's important that your production runs on the machine at the competition. Therefore, it's become a central tenet that real hardware is king and the effects must work on an actual real machine. Actually, some glitches and tricks used for exploits only work on real hardware, as they use undocumented CPU instructions, previously unknown graphics modes, tricks that rely on exact hardware timing, and so on. Demos can even function as unique test suites for emulator coders, which may run better behaved commercial software, but fall over under the torture test of a carefully built demo. This demo, 8088 miles per hour, for the IBM 5150, literally did not run on any MS-DOS emulators at the time of its release in 2015. The graphics hardware simply did not emulate it at all, and the tight timing requirements would often just crash the emulator. This capture is from an actual machine and shows the CGA card doing first 16 colors, and now a 256 color plasma, and finally there will be a 1024 color image. This should be impossible. Through years of coding, demos have built up their own list of tropes and effects that show up across multiple platforms. Here's a short list of some of the more common ones. The most basic is the scroller, or scrolling text. Demo authors like to spice it up a bit by making the text follow a path, usually a sine wave. Raster bars, or copper bars, is a fancy way of describing these horizontal gradient rainbow lines. They were cheap to display on certain old platforms and still make an appearance today. Star fields, either zooming or scrolling, often fill the background, while other effects display in the foreground. Rotating cubes, pyramids, and other 3D solids, either wireframe or flat-shaded. Synchronized particles moving in waves or patterns. Endless tunnels, often with dynamic lighting effects. Plasma, which is based on a cloud generation algorithm. These colors usually appear to move around, a trick done by changing the color palette in the video hardware. Fractals pack a lot of visual interest in a small code size. And roto-zooming, much like the well-known Mode 7 of SNES hardware, this is an inexpensive way to simulate 3D motion. Let's talk about music now. The earliest demos simply used game tunes, as that was what was available at the time. Actually, a lot of early game composers are revered in the demo scene because they were the first to take sound chips designed for beeps and boops and attempt to treat them as serious music-making devices. The Commodore 64 in particular, with its SID sound chip, has a pantheon of legendary composers Rob Hubbard, Martin Galway, David Whittaker, Ben Daglish, Tim Follin. Right now we're listening to the soundtrack for Tintin on the Moon, composed by Jerome Tell in 1987. Some of these artists went to compose standalone tunes or demo tunes, but coding for the old sound chips was a major pain, and it still sounded like beeps and boops. Everything changed in 1987 with the release of Ultimate Sound Tracker for the Amiga. This is Ultimate Sound Tracker, a music composition tool for the Amiga. It creates module files or mods. Karsten Obarski created it in 1987 not as a demo tool, but because he wanted an easier way to add music to the games he was helping to write. Ultimate Sound Tracker looks and acts like a spreadsheet approach to music composition. 4 columns, 1 per channel, and 64 rows, 1 per 16th note. A note in a cell will play that instrument when its time comes, with an additional effect like vibrato or volume fade. One layer above this is the pattern, like one page with the grid on it. There are 31 available patterns to fill, and they can be played in any order or repeated, so a whole song can be built up from simple patterns like chorus or bridge. Like MIDI, it's just instructions on how the computer should play back the sound, but unlike MIDI, sound samples are stored with the module file, so that playback sounds identical on every machine. This is the foundation of tracker music. The result is a file that is small, self-contained, easy to play back on limited hardware at the time, sounds realistic, and is easy for non-coders to use. Oh, and one more thing. Ultimate Soundtracker shipped with a sample disc, the ST01, filled with a variety of sounds taken from the Roland D50 and other samplers of the time. For $50, Amiga users could get a whole music production studio and a pile of quality samples to go with it. This was completely game-changing. An entire culture of tracker musicians sprang up around it. Demo started incorporating mods into everything, and a family tree of sound tracker descendants appeared over the next 30 years. Impulse Tracker, Screen Tracker, Fast Tracker 2, the most recent one is Renoise, a complete world-class DAW that still uses the tracker format at heart. The old mod format still gets some love though. Check out this one from Hoffman, which abuses the pattern jump effect to play the song backwards.
What we're gonna do right here is go back, 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 back.
Of course, chip tunes didn't die with the release of the mod. Systems with weaker sound playback still exist, and there's a ton of technical mastery needed to really make them sing. Actually, with some knowledge of common sound chips, it's possible to tell by sound what chip is making a particular noise. The Atari Pokey chip is notoriously out of tune on low notes, the NES 2A03 has a high-frequency alias that plays along with the square wave, and the Sega Genesis uses a Yamaha FM synthesis chip with a very distinctive sound. Still, the SID chip appears to capture imagination the most, partly because of its analog filters that let it make whistles and smooth tones. This tune from Jammer for the C64 really tweaks the chip to make it talk. The last thing I'll say about music is to mention the crossover between scene musicians and the larger music industry. Some famous Demoscene musicians who have achieved outside success include Vert, aka Jake Kaufman, who went on to write music for DS games, Mighty Switch Force, and also the Shantae soundtrack. And Purple Motion, the Finnish composer who did the music for Second Reality. You might know him as Jan Valtonen, most recently the composer of the City Skylines background music. Of course, a lot of non-demo musicians got their start on the Amiga as well. Early rave music was largely written on the computer, and several big-name electronic artists credit the Amiga with launching their interests and their careers in electronic music. All this, and I didn't even mention the unintentional crossovers, like the time hip-hop producer Timbaland ripped off Finnish composer Tempest's song Acid Jazzed Evening and used it as the backing sound for Nelly Furtado's song Do It, and got sued for it. Yes, I'm serious. No, I don't have time to go into it. Let's move on. The third major role of a demo is that of the artist. This is sometimes a nebulous category because the coder is also sometimes the artist, but sometimes your demo really needs the touch of a master. Way back in the Whereas and BBS days, you might see ANSI artists at work. The computers and terminals could not display graphics, but did have a text mode with box drawing characters. So you'd have these graffiti-inspired works decorating the README file and showing off that your group means serious business. Pixel art is well known and an entire category of art now. This arose from low-resolution machines and also because scanners or digital photography was not a thing, so realism was hard to come by. Jim Sachs, while not a scener, was one of the first to really show what the medium was capable of. This particular image spread like wildfire over BBS and landed him a job making Defender of the Crown with Cinemaware. This image, taken from a ZX Spectrum demo, shows a real mastery of the format. The Speccy can't display color more accurately than in 8x8 pixel blocks, and the palette is only 16 colors large. Look carefully and you'll see the squares of color that make up this image. Careful dithering, the dot patterns between the colors, hides the transitions and makes the image appear seamless. This image is from a music disc, sort of like an album of tracker music released by scene groups. Music discs usually have an atmospheric player application to go along with the music. Pixel art can compete in its own category at a party or be part of a larger demo, like the pentagram forehead creature in Second Reality. Glitch art, another computer-based medium, involves image corruption or unintentional art from broken files and systems. This is more and more prevalent as a lot of demos feature breakdown of a 3D scene or a shader in an interesting manner. Procedural generation has always been an important part of scene art. You cannot make a 64 kilobyte demo if the majority of your space goes to textures. Efficient texture and geometry generation from compact formulas or clever reuse of an algorithm is one of the critical tools in the artist's toolbox. The new Demoscene artists will often work in 3D doing modeling or shader design. Spectacular results can arise from careful use of the new platforms. This 4K entry from YX spends 15 seconds doing ray tracing on the graphics card and then outputs this image. YX does a lot of coding work as well, and she built this solo, without a group. Okay, at this point I'm just going to show off some clips of demos so you can get a feel for the variety of the scene. This is Elevated, a 4K demo released in 2009. Height maps are a relatively common effect, but this one is extremely polished and does it all in 4K with a soundtrack. Drunk Chessboard by Infinity is a great Atari demo. Laser focused on just a few effects done well, a solid theme, and a banging soundtrack. Hungarian group Conspiracy released this 64K entry in 2018. It's the end of a trilogy, a well-deserved first-place winner. St. Nick, or Saint Nick, is a coder demo. Just one person worked on this, and you might notice the music is borrowed from Desert Dream. However, in addition to being a great exercise for the Atari ST, this one is caught on in its own way. The 3D data for the demo is available and has been ported to a dozen other platforms, like the PC, Amiga, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis. Most recently, I saw this one done in MATLAB. I just love this one. The particles are moved by a fluid dynamics simulation.
26, 45, 93, 2011.1, 419.5, 0.5, 5.2, 12, and begin 22, 65, 1. 74, 5.6, A.
Enigma is a classic Amiga demo, both for what it does technically, but also because of the music. It's been remixed a number of times, is in the top 15 downloaded on Mod Archive, and is definitely a certified C legend. Okay, this one won first place at Breakpoint 2009. Just look at it. Punk soundtracks are rare in the scene, so major points for the music here too. Life Force by Greek group Andromeda Software Development is consistently one of the top-rated demos on Poet, and for good reason. This demo is just absurdly polished in every single frame. This clip is in the middle segment, and I'm not going to show the end scene because I don't want to spoil it. You should really just watch this one all the way through. Okay, here's the part where I'm going to talk about why, personally, I like the Demoscene. So, when I was a kid, I grew up with an Atari 800 computer. Released in 1979, this machine has like 16 to 48 kilobytes of RAM and a MOS Technology 6502 processor. And when you turn it on, it boots into basic programming language. So a major component of owning a microcomputer at the time was there wasn't a ton of software, and the idea of making your own software was one of the main selling points. It's just what you did. You'd get magazines with text printouts of code to type in, and you'd save your stuff to terrible floppy drives or even worse cassette tapes. So I spent a lot of time programming this and making things appear on the screen or play music, and it was a really magical experience growing up. As I got older, we got newer computers that did more stuff, but programming it was always a fascination to the point where I decided that, yeah, this is what I want to do for a living. Well, unfortunately, the real world of software engineering is a lot less glamorous. There's a lot more text parsing and network junk and meetings and emails and less righteous hacks. If you do that, then someone will correctly tell you that you've written unmaintainable code and throw it out. Maybe you do your work on a virtual server that doesn't exist in a data center far away that you'll never be allowed access to. I like my job and all, but it's not quite how I thought it would be. But the scene, well, when you're watching a demo and you see something on screen and you know that's impossible, that can't possibly be there, but it is, that's what it's all about. Spending all day making a cool fire effect and having other people go, yeah, right on, that's cool. Or making a ray tracer in Scratch, or tweet-sized demo effects for the Twitter BBC microbot, it's all ways to reconnect with the magic of computing. So, the scene is that, but with a community of like-minded people. That's why I love it. In fact, I love it so much, actually, I help run a web radio that broadcasts scene music 24/7, Nectarine Demoscene Radio, in service for 12 years now, at least, with about 40,000 tunes and a small community of regular listeners. Give it a listen sometime. Anyway, thanks so much for following along with my presentation to the end. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a thing or two. Long live the scene. How about one more for the road?